Welcome back to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sarah Payne, and I'm bringing you fascinating conversations with some of the industry's top marketing minds. On today's episode, we're talking about podcasts. They've become one of the most powerful tools for building thought leadership. But how do you know if it's right for your brand? We'll break down the pros, the pitfalls, and everything in between to help you decide if podcasting is the right fit for your thought leadership strategy. Sara brings incredible expertise and insight into what makes a podcast succeed. She's an award-winning author, podcast producer, and brand architect with a knack for turning narratives into connection. She founded Favorite Daughter Media, where she helps businesses develop thought leadership strategies and connect with their audiences. She also launched a book earlier this year called Open This Book, The Art of Storytelling for Aspiring Thought Leaders, and you can get your own copy on Amazon. She has so much knowledge and experience to share on this topic, so I'm thrilled to have Sara on the show today. Welcome.
I'm so glad this is recorded because that was the best intro I've ever gotten.
Show that one to your parents, right?
Yes, that's going to be my ringtone.
Love it. Well, I'm just thrilled to have you here. Obviously, this podcast, this show would not be here without you and our other producer, Larry Roberts. You've got so much experience. You've worked on so many episodes, not only as a producer, but also as a podcast host yourself. So I thought maybe we'd start with a conversation around why podcasts. Like, what's one thing that really stands out to you about the podcast format in particular, compared to other forms of media when you think about great platforms for thought leadership?
Yeah, I think with podcasting, the best part, in my opinion, is how personal it is. Because with most marketing communications, it's so like scripted. It's so like by the book. It's the format is always kind of like stoic, and it's TV ads and things that are just so impersonal. But with a podcast, it's a conversation and it's the face of the brand. It's not a sales message. It's just you and me talking about what we're passionate about. And it lets people actually get to know us instead of just seeing a company. They see the person behind the brand. And it's so great for building trust, building a community. I'm a little obsessed with them. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. And you're so right on all of those things. I agree that the authenticity of the people behind the brand, you know, if you want to be a thought leader, it isn't just thought leadership as a brand. It is bringing forward literally the thought leaders, right, who are the experts at solving these gnarly problems in the industry, actually bringing that forward in a real authentic way. And I think podcasts are a great way to do that. The other thing I wanted to add on to that is that I don't want to make it sound like they're not a lot of work. They are a lot of work. But when you think about, you hit record and 30 minutes later, you have a piece of content. Yes, some back-end production is needed, but that's ready to go, versus a 1,500 word article that's going to go through 5 rounds of revisions over a 3-week period of time, right? It is a way to allow your thought leadership to happen in a very rapid, dynamic sort of way. And I think there's a brilliance to that.
Yeah. And it's not just that it's rapid, but it's more genuine. Because if I'm going to write an article, I'm going to write it and then I'm going to rewrite it. And then I'm going to put it through an AI to proofread
overthink it.
Yeah. You overthink it. You like, it's so many revisions before it actually goes out. But with a podcast, this is it. Like we're talking, what we say is what you hear, and what you see is what you get. So I think that is another piece of it. You don't have to try to make everything perfect. You just kind of come as you are. And I love that. It just leads into that authenticity and just being who you are. But then it also does make the whole content creation side easier too, because you take one podcast episode that's 30 minutes and you can have social media content for the month.
Yes.
If you repurpose it, you have blog posts, you have quote graphics, you have reels, audiograms, all of these different pieces of content that you just take from this one larger piece, and it just simplifies the process.
I totally agree with that. And there, you know, we'll get into it. There's a lot of obviously hard work that goes into the upfront planning, and this is hard work. but it can be a great way to make sure you've got regular recurring content that can be repurposed into multiple different channels. So let's talk a little bit about some of the signs that producing a podcast might be the right fit for a brand. Like, when do you think it's a good idea for a brand to start their own podcast?
I think it's really, if they have somebody who is comfortable being the voice or the face of the brand and that is comfortable speaking and having a conversation, there's no reason not to do it at this point. So many companies are doing this, and it's becoming like the number one, basically, marketing channel. And if you're not doing it, you're almost kind of missing the boat because it's just growing so fast. But you don't want to force it. So if you don't have somebody that feels comfortable speaking and is able to do this in a way that's authentic and doesn't feel forced, because then it just gets a little.
Yes, totally. Yeah. And I think, if somebody truly wants to be a leading voice on a particular topic in the healthcare industry, the podcast platform is a really powerful platform for owning that topic and getting your brand out there. But you also have to be committed to it for the long term.
Yes.
Right? You have to be committed to producing it regularly. I would say to folks, don't produce a podcast if the vision of what is in your mind or your executive team's mind is really just 5 or 6 episodes worth of content, right? Like, you have to be able to see that longer term editorial vision that has some legs to it. This is not really the platform for it to be more of a one and done type of thing.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah, there are opportunities to create some of those just like almost one and done, and we call them like micro series.
Kind of like a webinar series would be kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah. So there's really powerful ways to use those too, using them for like new client onboarding or team onboarding for your company, like introductory ways of like getting the foundational concepts of your brand understood. And use that, do a couple, like 6 episodes and just have them be evergreen. And that is a really great way to get that information across. But for the most part, yes, a podcast is a long game, and you're not going to start really seeing the results that you expect from it until you're probably like at least a year in. So you have to have that patience, but be committed to it and be excited about it the whole time. Because if you start out as like, this is going to be great, we got this is going to change the shape of our brand, and then you're 6 episodes in and you're like, this isn't changed the brand yet.
Right.
Like,
where are the leads?
It doesn't happen overnight. You need to take the time to build your audience, build the trust, build all of the growth that you're looking for. And then you're going to start to see all of those results start trickling in.
Yeah, I love that you put that 12-month fence post out there, because I think you're right. I think it's realistic to be thinking at this more in the long term. And it is, because that's what thought leadership is. Thought leadership is intended to be, more top of funnel, focused on problem solving, identifying those people that have that problem and building a relationship with them over time, not, middle funnel to bottom funnel when people are more looking for a product, right? And so this is a great way from an awareness building standpoint to get your brand out there, get your experts out there, build that relationship over time.
Yeah, and it builds credibility. And
Absolutely.
That part is super important too. And you don't even have to wait the year and a half to see the credibility results, because those can be pretty instant. If you have a podcast and you're constantly talking about the subjects you're an expert in, that credibility is there. So if someone finds you and they want to see, like, is this person legit? They go to your social media, because they don't go to websites anymore. Those days are gone. They go straight to your social, and they see like, oh, I did this podcast and I was a guest on this podcast, and here's the one that I host. It's right there. Like, okay, this person must know what they're talking about, or else they wouldn't be doing all of these podcasts.
2 things I want to say about that. One is, so many of our clients want to get podiums at conferences, right? They want to be accepted to speak at conferences. And what you just said, that's another great example of not just winning new business or earning new business, right? It's also about earning those opportunities to get on the stage. To your point, they're not going to your website and looking at your bio. They're going to your social media platforms to see that you are, in fact, posting content that lines up with the abstract that you are going to submit. And almost every single one of our clients has a goal, an objective to get more speaking opportunities at these conferences. They're highly competitive. And if the panelists that are choosing those, the committee that's choosing those speakers to speak, go to your social media platform and they don't see this type of content out there, you're not going to get the ask, right? So I do think that podcasting also lines up for achieving those types of objectives as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like a step one for creating a speaker reel. Because it's like, it always makes me think of when I was in college applying for internships, but you couldn't get the internship without an internship.
I know. Yes.
It's like when you buy scissors, but you need scissors to open the package. How do you get a speaker reel if you don't have opportunities to be a speaker?
You start a podcast.
Yes. If you want to get on stages, you need to start creating your own stages. And you do that through podcasting. You do that through webinars, things that are digital, that are easy. Because it's a webinar, you jump on Zoom and you have a webinar. It's not that hard to do. Podcasting, there's a little bit more to it if you want to get on all the platforms, but it's a way to create your own stage. And it's a way to prove that you know what you're talking about and you can speak about it in a way that makes sense and connects. And that's going to get you on a stage a lot faster than just sending out written pitches.
Yes, absolutely. So if a brand is starting from scratch, Sara, what's the first thing they should do to really set themselves up for success in starting a podcast?
The first thing is before we even talk about this is going to be a podcast, we need to figure out our goal and we need to figure out what is our ULP, and that's unique listener proposition. And you remember this, we went through this whole exercise with you when we were launching this podcast. What is it about you and your brand and your message that's unique? And that's important, whether you're podcasting, blogging, publishing, whatever you're doing, whatever type of thought leadership you're trying to put out there. We have so much information in the world. There's very little that when it comes to data and facts that we can't get from Google. So it's not necessarily you need to start a podcast to teach people about these factual concepts. What is it about you that makes your experience and your perspective on it different and valuable? So thinking about that and what stories that you have and what experiences that you have, that's going to shape all the content that you do moving forward. And when you set your goals, then you're able to align it and really build out a strategy that's going to be impactful. So you're not just kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, I love the directness of what you said there in terms of, what is that unique perspective? And I remember this being the hard part when we started this show. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do in my head, right? It was this idea in my head, and it takes a lot of hard work to define it extremely well on paper. And you and Larry were great partners in helping me do that.
Yeah, and it's so important. And it's a step that I honestly see people skip all the time. They go straight to the I have a podcast, but they forget the why do I want a podcast? It's not just about having one. It's about using it and setting it up in a way that's going to have an impact and have, we talk about ROI and return on investment, but what's the return on impact? What impact is this show going to have?
100%. Yeah. So let's talk about how to create a podcast that serves the audience while also aligning with brand goals.
Yeah. I mean, the first step is, who is your audience? And you have to really know that. And a lot of the times the audience part seems like the easy part, but it's not. Because you might be wanting to talk to your target audience, as in who it would be your client for your business. Or you might want to be talking to people that could be partners for your business, or it's more broad and it's businesses that you it's more of a B2B conversation. Who is it exactly that you're talking to? Who is it that could benefit from your message? And it's not always as obvious. I've had to stop clients in the middle of figuring out what it is of this is not what your audience wants. and they realized that their goals and their audience just weren't aligning.
You said earlier, a lot of people skip over the goal setting stage, and I think they skip over the target audience definition stage. Because again, I think we think that it's obvious, or we sort of take that for granted, or it's in our head. But then, there's a lot of assumptions that are being made between the group of people that are involved in producing it, and there isn't that real clear filter for topic selection, guest selection, all of the things. And you just get right down to it. And then perhaps the content isn't really hitting the nail on the head in terms of what that audience really needs. So you're going to struggle to build that audience over time.
It's funny. I was just running a workshop at a conference for the Association for Financial Counselor and Planner Education. And the workshop brings everyone through the process that we brought you guys through. Basically, it's figuring out what your goals are, who your audience is, what your UVP is, unique value proposition. And I had people come up to me after, like, I was going to launch my podcast in January. I was ready to go. And then I came to your session, and thanks a lot. I am not ready to go. They had skipped all of those steps. They just came to, okay, I've got the name and I'm going to say this, and here we go, which is fine if you just want a podcast to have a podcast. But if you want a podcast and to reach goals and to make an impact on what you're doing or what your industry is doing, you can't skip the beginning. You have to set the goals. You have to know your audience. You have to figure out what your message is and how it can relate to who you're speaking to. You have to figure out what the why is behind saying, I want a podcast.
100%. And again, this is stuff that marketing leaders know. But again, I think that there is danger in shoehorning what might be a broader marketing objective into then that just serves your podcast as well. And actually, you need to really define that. You need to really get in and figure that out.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with a new client. They have 3 target audiences. And she's like, okay, so how can we design a podcast for all of them? And I had to break the news of we can't, because the podcast is going to be like Frankenstein together. Just not going to make sense. So the other step in addition to starting a podcast is starting a whole content marketing strategy and plan. So instead of trying to shoehorn all of these audiences into one podcast, how do we aim the podcast at one audience, but then repurpose that content to reach a different audience and use like this one piece of content that we have and just tailor it to fit the audiences instead of trying to just have everything talk to everybody.
Yeah. Smart advice. Really smart advice. Another mistake I think people make is thinking, oh, well, this is an owned channel and we can say whatever we want to say. And while that's true, most people don't want to tune in for commercials.
Yes.
If that was the case, we wouldn't have a fast forward option to get through the commercials on TV, right?
Yes.
We'd even have an entire streaming channel devoted to commercials. Can you imagine just sitting down?
I think it's called like the Home Shopping Network.
Yeah, true. True. Click to buy.
Yes.
Yeah.
My mom would fall asleep to those and then wake up in the middle of the night and order things and then forget. It was hilarious.
But she fell asleep to it, right? Yeah. This is my point.
Yep.
People aren't there. They don't really want that. They're going to fall asleep.
Yes.
So my point is don't pretend that your podcast is about thought leadership and then just hit them up with the promotional content about your company, right? Don't do the bait and switch. You're not going to build an effective audience that way. And I don't think it's typically the marketing department that makes that mistake. It's usually the executive team thinking, oh, hey, let's talk about how great we are. And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place and a way to do that inside of the thought leadership, but you really have to focus the content on serving your audience.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
I know, right? And so often that is solving their problems, right? I like to think of it like each episode is another problem that you're solving. And maybe it's the same one, but you've got different takes on solving that problem. But people are not searching for products. They're searching for solutions to their problem. So start there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a misconception that we see all the time, because when we are launching a podcast for a brand or for a business, it's called a branded podcast. But the podcast is not about the brand. It's about the vision and the values behind the brand. It's about serving the clients that you'd serve through your brand. And if you're about to start a podcast and the goal that you set is to bring on clients, is to increase sales, don't start a podcast.
Right.
Because you're starting an infomercial. Like your goal has to be exactly what you said, to serve an audience, to offer value. And when you do that, you're building trust, you're building relationships, you're building a community, and you become that thought leader. You become that person that's top of mind for what it is you're talking about. So when someone is ready, like, okay, this is what I need, you're who they go to. You become that trusted source for that service. You don't have to be selling, and you shouldn't be selling. I've heard people actually give their price list on a podcast.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes. Oh. They like, yeah. So if you want to work with us, like, here's our services list. And I'm like, that's not why we're here.
Delete. Yeah. No, I agree with you 1,000%. Yeah. Because if you are talking about their problem really, really well, they're going to assume you have that solution and you're already top of mind for them. And then when they are actually looking to buy that service, they're going to call you first because you're top of mind.
Yeah. Another thing with that too is people are afraid to kind of like draw back the curtain and talk about how they do things, because it's like, well, if I tell them how to do it, they'll just do it themselves.
Or I'm giving away my secret sauce or the proprietary.
Yeah. No, you're not though. And like, if the people who are going to do it themselves, it's because they don't have the budget to pay someone to do it. So you're not.
They would have done it already. They would have done it already.
Yeah. Or they wouldn't have the budget, so they would never have paid you anyway. So who is it hurting if they have a few new ideas to try to implement? But the people who do have the budget to do it, they care more about their time than their money. It's worth more to them. Yeah. So why would they try to learn how to do it themselves and put in all the time and figure out how to do it? Not only just do it, but do it well and do it right. When what you did by telling them how you do it is prove that you know how to do it.
Yes. So well said. Let's talk about selecting a host.
Pick Sarah.
Either Sarah. Both Sarahs.
Either of us. I meant you, but me too.
Let's talk about what qualities or skills that brands should be looking for in their host. And because I've seen one mistake that I've seen companies make is to assume that the leading subject matter expert at their company should be the podcast host, right? Like that's just the default, make it that person. Subject matter expertise is important, but it also needs to overlap with someone who's good at connecting with people, good at natural storytelling, has innate curiosity to ask good questions, and frankly, a level of charisma in their personality.
Absolutely. And it kind of brings back to what you were saying before, that like the marketers know this, but it's the C-suite. It's the executives that don't necessarily get it, that they want it to be a sales message because we're putting money towards it. We need to see an immediate return. It has to be a marketing channel. They're probably not the best people to put in that position, because it's hard to change that mindset from this, like, I need to bring in business to I need to offer value. So a lot of the times the person that's going to be a better fit is probably someone in the marketing department, the person in charge of branding, the people that are in the more creative spaces.
And then some of the other experts within the company could be guests, right? Where you take, different opportunities to draw out that expertise.
Yeah. And it might not be the most senior level person that's going to be the best at it, because they're going to have that curse of knowledge. They're going to know something so well and so deeply that it's really hard to dial it back. There's been times that I'm talking to somebody about what they do in their industry, and I have to be like, okay, stop, picture me as a 5-year-old, and now say it again.
Yes.
Because you're just kind of programmed.
They're too close.
Yeah, you're programmed to talk about it at the level that you would talk about it in like a board meeting and with your peers who get this. But if we're listening to your podcast, we don't get it. So
and then some of that board presence comes with a level of polish and varnish that doesn't play as well in this format either, right? We need you to come in as a human, and not as an executive, right? And to be able, and this is what I mean by that connection with people, and this just being real versus delivering a key message, if you will.
Yeah. And this isn't true for every company. I mean, I've produced podcasts for CEOs of companies and they're a lot of fun and they have the
Yes,
personality, but it just depends on the person. If you are that
absolutely.
person, do it. But if you're not and you know that you're not and you can, and this isn't what you want to do, it's not worth your time, like when you could be spent focusing on other things that are more important, hand it off to someone in marketing or in client relations, someone who has the love and the creativity and the passion for it, because they're also just going to represent your brand so well because they love it so much.
Yeah,
They're talking
absolutely.
about what they're passionate about.
I want to pivot to talk about guesting on a podcast, right? Because not every brand is going to decide to produce their own podcast, but they may decide to, pursue a strategy where they want to get their subject matter experts on a bunch of other people's podcasts. But before we do that, I do think it's really important that we acknowledge that people need to make an investment in the technology to produce an excellent podcast, right? You can have a great expert, a great host, and great content, but it can all be wrecked by not having high quality content that allows that to get out there.
Yeah. The first thing I always tell people when they want to guest on a podcast is go buy a microphone. And if someone just tells me like, oh, I'm about to be a guest, I'm like, do you have a microphone? I don't care about anything else you have to say until you tell me if you have a microphone.
Yes.
Because we spend so much time trying to produce a well done show, a high quality show. And it makes it so hard when the guest comes in completely unprepared. And I've had guests record from the waiting room of a Jiffy Lube.
No.
On their phone.
No. And did you get the view from their chin up, the nostril?
It was back. Oh my God. We would have. It was back when it was audio only.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure they got the email of like, oh my gosh, the file was corrupted. I don't know what happened. So sorry, it can't release. Which is the podcast producer's way of saying this was not good and we're not going to put it on air.
Yeah. So invest in technology, folks. And if you don't have someone on your marketing team that can do the back end production for you, hire producers. Look up Larry and Sarah, hire producers. They'll take care of that for you. So let's talk about guesting. What's the most important thing that a spokesperson can do to prepare for being a guest on a podcast?
That is a very multi-step long answer, but to make it simple, well, the first is to have a goal and to know what your goal is. It's the same as going in to launch a podcast. Why do you want to be on a podcast? And again, if your goal is I want to increase sales or I want to bring in clients, I want to sell products or sell books, don't do it. Yeah, because you're going to be filming an infomercial. So make sure that your goal is I want to share this information. I want to share this value. I want to talk about this thing I'm passionate about. And that is the biggest piece of it, really, because if you go on a podcast and start pushing sales messages, you've just lost the show. They're not going to release it. The host just wasted their time. The team wasted their time.
They might call you and tell you they had a technical problem with your episode.
if they're chicken like I am, because I'm not brave enough to be like, oh no, we just didn't like it. I will lie. But that really is the first piece, is making sure that your plan is to lead with value, and then have a way that you can still turn it into a business opportunity. And that comes in at the end. So at the end of every podcast, most podcasts, the host will say, how can people get in touch with you or learn more or work with you? That is your sales opportunity. That is the moment when you tell them how they can work with you. You don't give your prices lists and all of that, but you tell them where they can find you. And what you should do is have that be a lead magnet. So have something, have a way to actually capture those listeners and continue that conversation. So be prepared and create lead magnets, have them be basically like the next step in that conversation. So if you want to learn more about this or take a deeper dive into what we talked about, go to this URL and download my ebook on this. And when I do that, I have it embedded on just a landing page on my website. So I can even say, and while you're there, you'll see my contact info, my socials, like everything will be there because it's on my website, but I'm sending them directly to something that just gives them more value.
Love that. Love that. Such great advice. I want to share a couple tips as well for folks. listen to some other episodes that the podcast has produced. It's going to allow you to get to know the host better. It's going to allow you to understand the format and know kind of what you're getting into, what questions you might be asked. I often will advise clients to anticipate questions you might be asked, but absolutely do not come in scripted, because people can smell that coming from a mile away, and it doesn't work in this format. We talked about it earlier. This is meant to be authentic and genuine, right? Kind of have an outline of the main points that you want to make. Think about what you're going to be asked and think about how those things flow together naturally, but don't over prepare, because it's going to come across scripted.
Yeah, I don't even like thinking of it as an interview. I feel like when you think of it as an interview, it's like just feels uncomfortable. It's like it's a job interview or something, and you have to get the right answers.
It's a test, and there's a right and a wrong.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, here's the answer to that next question. That's not what this is. This is a conversation.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, you have to be going in like, I'm ready to have a conversation about this topic. And then you just talk.
I was going to say, it's kind of like you're building a friendship. I don't mean to throw around friendship like I consider that every new person I meet on the street is an automatic friend of mine. Just more of, you spend 30 minutes together and you're going to know a heck of a lot more about who that other person is at the end of it, right? And so if you think of it as that conversation, connection, and a relationship builder, to your point, it's like, we just happen to be recording this conversation.
Yes. And it really should be about that relationship. Like, you're not only doing this for the audience, you're doing this for the show and for the host. And the worst thing that you can do when you want to be a podcast guest is make it transactional. That is like, we hate that as hosts, when you just come on, okay, here's my spiel. Here's how to reach me. Okay, bye.
Yeah.
Like, no, this is a relationship. I want you to continue to interact with me. I want you to continue to support my show and my brand so that I can continue to support your show and your brand. And the more you do that, the more you're like reaching out and celebrating that, like, I'm going to be on this show and look at this person that I'm going to talk to and all of that, the more we'll promote your episode. Because if we're excited about it, because you're excited about it, we're going to be sharing it a whole lot more than if you just showed up, did your thing, and left.
1,000%. That's such a great point, is that when any episode of any podcast goes out, the producers of that, the hosts of that are going to be promoting it, but they love when the guests are promoting it. And this is the reciprocal, right? You can even do guest swap, right? You go on someone else's podcast, they come on yours. And it's just this great relational way to be giving something back to each other from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, like, what's the best gift you can give a host for bringing you on their show? And yeah, we like gifts. Like, I have a mug right here from a podcast I was on, and like, that's great. But at the same time, the best gift you can give us is promote the show and share the episode and talk about it. And not even just your episode. Another episode comes out that you're not on, share that too. Just become one of their cheerleaders, become someone in their network, become like, there's so many people that I know through podcasting that I've never met before. But they are my cheerleaders. I'm their cheerleaders. They're on the acknowledgements page of my book because of how much they support me. And I've never met them. They live in Canada or something.
I did in October actually meet someone I'd had on the show who I'd never met in person. And she greeted me with a hug.
Yes.
Right? It's like we have this whole relationship through the podcast, and she gave me a hug. Like, that was kind of mind-blowing to me.
Well, it's funny because as podcast listeners, one of the reasons podcasting is so powerful is because it has the power to build relationships. But if you're a listener to a podcast and you listen to it religiously and every single week, you feel like you know the host.
Yes, you do.
You're not even on the show, but you feel like you know the host. So it's that effect, but on steroids, when you're the one actually having the conversation. And
absolutely.
I mean, we open up to podcast hosts more than most people in a professional setting. I'll go on a show thinking I'm talking about podcasting, and it's a deep dive into my child trauma and like what ADHD has impacted my brand and all of these things that I'm like, I don't talk about this in a regular meeting, but I'm talking about this to a stranger who lives in the UK.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a different type of connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Larry's going to kill us if we don't wrap this up, Sarah. Us two Sarahs could chat all day. Let's
Seriously.
transition into a quick fire segment before
I get
we
to do a
end.
quick fire.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yay. Okay.
What is the hardest part of creating a great podcast episode?
The hardest part for each episode is having something unique of value to bring, especially if you've been hosting the show for a while or it's a solo show that you don't have guests on. Like my show is called Branded and it's me and Larry co-host it together. We'll be sitting there before recording like, all right, we've already talked about this. Now what do we talk about? No, we talked about that already. So you have to really take the time to think about what messages that you're trying to get out there and what different perspectives you can lend to it, and always be giving some type of unique piece of value so that every episode is worth listening to.
Love that. In one word, what makes a podcast successful?
Authenticity.
Love it. I agree with that one. Who is one of the greatest podcast hosts that you listen to for inspiration for yourself?
Sarah Lohse. No, I'm kidding. Joe Saul-Sehy. He is the host of Stacking Benjamins. He is the first show that I guested on. He wrote the foreword for my book. He is a huge, huge part of how I do and why I do what I do. Just amazing all around guy.
And similar question, little different. Outside of the podcast that you produce, what's one of your favorite podcasts to listen to?
Okay, so it's called Potterless. And
I don't know that one.
I know all of your episodes. It's like, what podcast do you listen to for inspiration and for your industry and all of that? Potterless is about Harry Potter. And it's like a 20-something-year-old guy who's never read or watched them, reading them for the first time and talking about it. And it is hilarious. And it feeds my little inner nerd. And it is the first podcast I ever listened to. And to this day, one of the few that I actually listen to regularly.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. So weird and so niche, but I love it at the same time.
It's fantastic.
What's your one word for 2025 for your own personal, professional life? What's your one word?
Unapologetic.
Ooh, that's such a great one. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, Sarah. This was really fun. And of course, I've got to ask you, how can listeners get in touch with you?
Oh, I didn't even know you were going to ask. I didn't see this coming. I'm not prepared. We mentioned my book is called Open This Book, and it's all about storytelling. If you want to start figuring out what your story is and how you can tell it so that you could be on podcasts or on stages, I did take all of the writing prompts from it and put it into a journal. It's downloadable for free at openthisjournal.com. And while you're there, you'll see all my socials, my contact info. You can get in touch with me, and I would love to hear from you.
You nailed it. That was a great example of how to answer that question. I hope everyone took notes. I was going to do another plug for your book and tell people to go to Amazon, put it in their cart, buy it so they can get all these great. There it is, folks. There it is. Put it in your cart, buy it, read it this weekend. You nailed it. And that was a great example for how people can take that opportunity to sell at the end of a podcast.
It's like I've done this before.
I know, right? Well, folks, thanks for joining us. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for being part of the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time.